So, first time for me to be in Ukraine, first time for me to be in Kiev, and it was a very nice, very interesting surprise. The dimension of the city, of the landscape, and all what I'm discovering these very few days. This is 4 stories about transformations. And it's all about stories. Stories of projects and about projects which I have coordinated. It could be said in brief that I have been the main actor in these stories. But is this really the case? Actually, no. Others have worked with me, younger architects and collaborators, and the respective clients have played their decisive role, their power and pressuring not to be forgotten. Since the following stories concern finished projects, it would be unfair to forget those who have built them and also not to speak of the context, explaining the technological competencies and skills of the firms involved, the economic circumstances that, for each project, were different, the antagonism that came to the surface, and the discussions and debates that occurred. Therefore, it's important for me to stress that I'm speaking not only for my part, but for the many people who were involved but are not present here today. So, obviously, my stories are from one single point of view, mine, and as far as my performance is concerned today, many other witnesses and players could present the same stories but highlighting different points and issues quite differently compared to the ones I have chosen with different tones and meanings. As a project designer, I have my own views, knowing my range of action. However, I have always liked to design aiming at building something, as I consider the building site to be a fundamental passage in the project work. It is the true reward for the commitment and achievement arising from the work carried out at the drafting table, as it was once called, or from that done on the computer. Consequently, my interest in the time, the methods, and the practical organization of the actual construction, which, apart from the specifications of the executive design, should always leave room, at least in my experience, for fine-tuning details, solving unforeseen problems, and responding to the client company's needs. This involves the know-how to make well-balanced modifications during the period of the project. And you, as a project designer, must be able to fulfill this role. You must be there. I wonder if, in my future experiences as a project designer, I will perhaps find myself a prisoner of the inescapable logic of building information modeling, BIM, where project design and its carrying out are very close tied, probably leaving no or very little room for improvisation. However, I am confident that there will be still space for the designer's interpretation and perhaps also for their digressions, if it carries no cost, throughout the project. The main interest in this event in Kyiv is transformations. I want to talk about 4 projects I have worked on. The Vasca Navale, was there a slide before? I have forgotten a slide. No, okay. Then we keep still standing this one. I've worked on the Vasca Navale, the ex-experimental boat basin, the Palazzo Massimo Museum, the Ludovico Quaroni Faculty of Architecture in Flaminia Atrium, and the tomb of Cecilia Metella. The first two projects concern the transformation of what were already existing structures. The designation of a new use for these called for designing an important project that would modify their original condition. However, in both cases, though to different degrees, the elements of continuity of the original building morphology had to be still recognizable. For the boat basin, this proved to be more complicated and intricate. For Palazzo Massimo, more evident and didactic. This will become clear through the presentation. The criteria used for the transformation came out of the structural and typology identities of the two structures marked for the new project. The transformation involved a quite dramatic modification in building volume. For the boat basin, a substantial blow-up, where the pre-existing structure would be replaced by a new one. And for the Palazzo Massimo Museum, an infrastructural addition of service spaces, vertical, horizontal walkways, service facilities. The other two projects concern what I would call introvert transformation measures involving already standing structures, but requiring a redesigning of empty space delineated by their existing layout. In the case of Cecilia Metella, there is the CANactions courtyard adjoining the tomb. In the case of the Ludovico Quaroni Faculty of Architecture, an enclosed courtyard between two parts of a welded structure, neither of them with any specific identity. Let's start with Cecilia Metella. The ticket office and caretaker's premises at Cecilia Metella. The tomb of Cecilia Metella is the most famous Roman monument of the ancient Appian Way. On the top of the cylindrical drum or rotonda, which is 29 meters in diameter, which protects the tomb, Goethe collected flora specimens for his nature studies. Caetani Castle, 1,300 after Christ, 100-300 after Christ, rises the castle above a lava flow of impressive basalt rock, resulting from the volcanic activity of the present Castelli Romani area. The volcano craters around Rome are now filled with lakes. The need was to replace the existing box with a larger and more suitable structure to accommodate the ticket office and caretaker's premises. The project was planned to be carried out completely off-site. A small structure weighing 7 tons in steel, produced in a metal worker's workshop 25 kilometers from the tomb, with an internal wooden finish, was transported there and positioned in the courtyard using a crane. The trapezoidal shape, less than 12 square meters of surface area, softens the visual impact of the structure's volume with 6 millimeters steel plate facades compressing and lightening the mass, leaving the corners empty. The base frame raises the wool structure above the ground with the glass level almost parallel to the steel one. This is the plan of the little tiny building. A foreign body where the apparently solid and permanent features of the shape and the material merge with the structure's features of reversibility, as it can be taken and removed, if necessary. Out of the imposed force of the mausoleum is 30 before Christ, with its impressive travertine blocks and the peperino stone walls of the Caetanic castle 13 centuries after. The ticket office emerges as a magnet, drawing visitors to the entrance and along the visitors' route, and a showcase of precious artifacts along the long side of the structure. Sorry, there is something. Boo? Here it is. It is like an unidentified flying object landed from the space, which speaks another language. Quaroni Faculty of Architecture Atrium. Faculty of Architecture. I had experience of teaching in a new building. That was 93. How fantastic, you would say. And also I thought so at first. Coming in from the street, an entrance hall, a 20 per 14 meters courtyard, a corridor leading to the lecture room. That was the situation. But it was a bleak and disastrous sequence of structures. The uncovered courtyard, the mud under your shoes on rainy days, with no protection against the cold on winter days, nor against the heat on hot summer days. I complained that winter along with my students, all of us wearing heavy overcoats. From this very unpleasant situation, there emerged a small opening, a self-promoted project. Don't complain, do something, the dean of the faculty told me with wisdom and foresight. Meanwhile, he had eliminated a recurring annoyance, and I, on the other hand, was motivated to solve this problem for my students. The proposal had a solid base to go ahead on. This is the place, very central in Rome. Inside. Okay. A self-promoted project. The proposal had a solid base to go ahead. That is, there was money, even not so much, and I stubbornly followed it through to the end. The idea was to design a covered piazzetta, a small square, a foyer, linking the entrance to the lecture rooms, a meeting area, producing a meeting area, the only one in the two buildings, for students and staff. Conceived to unite the two buildings, respecting as much as possible their separateness, the industrial canopy appears in profile to be an asymmetrical bellows with two open gaps on the shorter sides, one of which is still a very small garden with picnic tables. You see the plan. This space, always crowded with students, with the lush green garden, the lush green garden along the sides, and the climbing roses bushes growing forever upwards, seems today to be almost a victim of its own success. This is because the lack of any type of maintenance for the last 20 years. So it has resulted in a rampant growth of vegetation, as if you were in a forgotten greenhouse, tucked away on the edges of an abandoned park. a love that consumes the beloved creature, it can also happen in architecture. But let's talk about construction. I had already discovered at that time that the university technical office had neither the competence nor the interest to follow the work of this mini procurement call. It was 140,000 euro today. Being the technical office, overworked with an enormous numbers of tasks in a university of 150,000 students, and also because it was simpler to let the contracted company to do what they wanted without any controls. This is always simpler. And with the subsequent consequences which you can easily imagine, the choice of poor materials, approximated work, a free interpretation of the designs and the specifications, maintenance work to be begun just as the building work was finished. What can I say? The strategy adopted, I advise you as a designer, young designers, is to draw up an extremely precise and detailed executive project on one-to-one scale. When the company, this is a space again, space when it was finished, clean and so. When the company won the call without even looking at the designs, as was usual, it had to accept them nevertheless, or withdraw, incurring heavy penalties. In this case, they accepted to do the work, also having to find me as a designer to manage the work. An assumption of responsibility for both, but in the end, it all went well. There is no other? Services for the Palazzo Massimo Museum. Right in the center of Rome, between the Roma Termini railway station and the archaeological site of the Diocletian bath, Termini station up there. Here you have the Termini Diocletiano. This is the museum. This is where we did the work. This is the place of the project. So the huge building was a famous Jesuit school converted into, sorry. So there is. This is the place. That's the building. On the rear side. And on the rear side, a small separate building of 2 floors, which the museum management wanted to use for offices and restoration services. I accepted the job, calling on a firm of young people, most of them former students of mine. Called them to work with me. The building had already had its facade restored under a city enhancement scheme, but the superstructure in concrete dating from the 1920s was in terrible state. The floors were dangerous. Originally a ticket office with shops for the suburban tramways, the building had a main structure of about 5 meters in width and a blind facade with no sunlight entering, looking onto a courtyard, using it as a parking lot. We thought that it would be a good move to free up the building spaces, creating a continuity with the inside linking rooms and add to the outside, to the cost of the courtyard, stairs, lifts, toilets, other kind of elevators, and so on. This would be housed within a new volume, often only a little more than 2 meters, made out of steel, attached to the pre-existing concrete of the existing building. The solution was for a large restaurant kitchen and bar on the ground floor, accessible from the public road. Then from the bar there would be access to the first floor with the restaurant and its terrace. The other half of the first floor would be allocated to office space. However, the key of the whole project lay in the linking walk bridge to the museum. This one. Where visitors leaving the exhibition halls would be able to directly reach the restaurant with its external space looking towards the beautiful scene of the Piazza della Repubblica fountain. They could re-enter the museum if they wished or leave the building by the stairs, immersing themselves once again into the city life, here or inside. So here's the city around. Here's the courtyard of the museum, and this is the first floor with the terrazza. As you well know, that was as it was. The structure, addition, the bridge, and is the nearly finished addition. As you well know, a museum with catering services, a bar and restaurant, is successful only if the museum has a high turnover of visitors, thus justifying the management costs. And it's a delicate question. However, very often, museums interested in visiting museums have restaurants that the normal public who are not interested in visiting the museum but want a good meal prepared, if possible, by a star-rated chef, like in the Pompidou, like in the Fondation Vuitton and other restaurants also in Italy. They want to visit the restaurant having a good place to eat. In these cases, the restaurant has longer opening hours than those of the museum and must operate autonomously. There should be direct access from inside the museum during museum opening hours, but when closed, there should be an external access where there are no problems related to museum security. We try to achieve this by establishing clear physical limits to the new services and setting up the right conditions for their independent management. The architectural solution renders the functional additions clear, with the first floor enclosed by serigraphed pastel-colored glass, which also covers the link bridge. While the glass walls mirror the museum facades with the invasive safety stairs, the ground floor towards the courtyard was designed as a basement in dark gray porcelain steel, which extends to the west side. As it was before, as it is today. Come to Rome in a year's time, everything will be finished, and book a dinner there after a visit to the monument, to the museum. The boat basin of the Faculty of Engineering in Rome. We call it Vasca Navale. The project is 320 meters long, and it says nearly half finished. The rest of the building will be start as a building site next year. In 1929, Benito Mussolini opened the National Basin for Experimental Boat Architecture. On YouTube, the soundtrack to the event transports you into the atmosphere of the rhetoric of the regime, which accompanied many openings throughout that politically disastrous, but nevertheless constructive 20 years. Almost 70 years later, the building had already been abandoned for quite some time. This was during the construction in 29. This is how it was inside. Years, 70 years later, in 1997, the building had already been abandoned for quite some time. Half of the 320 meters canopy covering the basin had collapsed. The stink of the guano of hundreds of pigeons cut in your throat, forcing you to wear masks. The relics of machines and equipment were offered to those who wished to cart them away. A covering, you see, a covering, a basin half collapsed with water on the bottom, and the surrounding areas with empty factories and storage depots. Even a dog racing track without dogs or betters. Gypsies on horses going about their business. Was that really Rome? I must tell you that as a new university in 1992, we settled in different areas where we had already existed, but in ruin, industrial buildings. So we have built the School of Law, the Faculty of Law, in a former glass factory. I teach in the former abattoir of Rome, the biggest abattoir in Europe built at the end of the other century. And the Faculty of Literature was arranged in a former Alfa Romeo workshop. So, one shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. I don't know how you say that in Ukrainian, but I believe it is the same meaning. Our university, Roma III, responded in this way to the Rome municipality, which had proposed to transfer the building to them for zero costs. And at that moment, no one actually knew what to do with it. The Department of Architectural Design was given the responsibility to deal with it. And so, from the feasibility study to the final project, I was asked to coordinate an interdisciplinary group for this singular design project, very special one, to transform the boat basin into an infrastructure for teaching and research. The roof, the basin. What was needed, a new roof, and to transform, I was saying, the boat basin into an infrastructure for teaching and research. A great technology, structural and installation engineering, an external consultant for the technology, a graphic designer, then I'll tell you why, and a small, tightly knit group of my young graduate students. The office for our job was located inside the university, and we could work day and night, Saturday and Sunday. I had the university where I was teaching already since a lot of years, as my client. A lot of responsibility in this case. And the subject was new faculty of economy for Roma Tre University at the beginning. The basin had operated as an experimental and avant-garde test laboratory for the study of hulls and propellers, whose models were built on site. The models of the hulls and propellers were tested near the workshop and connected to a horizontal crane, the dynamometer chassis, which towed them, checking their resistance to the wave motion caused, on the other hand, by a moving bulkhead, shifted with the help of large pulleys. We subjected the criteria for the transformation to a dogma. To preserve the structural integrity and guarantee the legibility of the basin structure regarding its shape and the concrete ribs which every 2.5 meters characterize the upper surface, the extrados. That was the dogma, to preserve. If the entire canopy had been demolished and replaced, the basin instead would have had to be preserved. The basin would be used to accommodate the new didactic functions, different sized teaching rooms, and possibly laboratories. The basin was the memory, the sign, the resistant shape, the backbone around which the flesh of a new body could be organized. The basin dictated the rules. Another feature of the project from the beginning concerned the architectural nature of the new building, for which the low-key and rigorous language of an industrial building was adopted, making up the backbone of the urban recovery carried out by the university in all this area, the Valco San Paolo area. With the final use of the building, changed to the Department of Engineering in 2007, the project became subjected to some layout modifications, which were easily absorbed because of its properties of being a versatile organism. The first stage of the work began in August 2009, and finished mid-2012, stretched out for 140 linear meters. If we look at the plan of all the building, it includes the 50 meters of the path rebuilt with the size and shapes identical to original one, fully recovering the dynamometer chassis, we'll see it later, which towed the hull models. An open space environment for research groups overlooks the chassis, placed on its original tracks in a double-head space where a section of the basin is filled with a reserve of water to be used for fire protection. In body B, there is a 150-seat conference hall, and there are offices for teachers and laboratories distributed over different floors. Let's go ahead, but going back to the show. This is the cross-section. This is the Vasca, kept. This is the auditorium into the Vasca. You have a street running all the way to the southern part, and you see the new structure, the new roof in steel. And also what is important is that all the installations, also all the technical installations are outside, are not in the building. So the research space is organized in 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. And one on the basement level to the north, where an embankment previously existed. So you see that to the north side, we have 3 stories. On the south side, 4 stories. And also you see that the decision was to have to interrupt, not to use the axis of the existing Vasca, but to move it, to shift it to the south, to get space for the street. So the service galleries were constructed in the basement, containing all the equipment and installation plants, including the one for geothermal energy made possible by foundation piles, which goes to 50 meters below, till to the gravels. You see the Vasca, the building. Please. If you don't go ahead. What happens? I was responsible as a direttore artistico, but I was checking all the drawings from the workshops, all the facades, the details. That was very important, a very tough job together with the responsible, an engineer responsible for the site. If we look at the cross-section as before, we can see that the structure's curved steel frames rest on concrete pylons in the south and on columns to the north. But what is important here is the floors of the top two levels are suspended from the frames with pair of rods. So this floor and this floor are suspended with these ropes connected to the big frame, steel frame. The aim of suspending the floors was to have a little effect as possible on the basing structure, even if for functional needs this occurred for only 50%. Moreover, the preference for steel provided the possibility to emphasize the original shape of the canopy, as well as to use smaller structural dimensions and be able to construct the pieces offside, thus reducing the time. Could you please, could you stop talking there? Could you please stop talking because you disturb me a lot? Thank you. Thank you, Theo. This is the north facade, and this is the south facade. And the curtain wall set on the portico foundation is screened by the sun breakers and has a continuity of frames covered in aluminum sheeting, alucobond. On the northern side, transparent and opaque elements alternate, creating an apparently causal pattern that varies the facade. This was designed by the graphic designer. I said, okay, I need such transparent surfaces, but I called the graphic designer to work on the pattern which I couldn't control. And finally, the top ridge, which was suggested by my good friend Thomas Herzog from Germany, contains skylights and openings for which is up there, running all the way. Contains skylights and openings for the natural air vents of the covering, and on which a large number of photovoltaic panels have been installed. You see the ridge, you see the panels, you see the facade. A strong industrial-like building. This is the street, runs all the way and looks into the aula from the windows. And this is what I called before the dynamometer chassis. Skylights. This will be the next phase. Regarding the current focus on energy saving, the project has provided different responses, making maximum use of the natural light from windows, skylights, and solar chimneys, integrating the external screens to regulate the sun's radiation, using natural ventilation, and installing the photovoltaic panels on the roof. But I don't want to bore you any longer with a rather detailed project report. There are other aspects that I would like to explain you just for curiosity. I must tell you about how the demolition actually began. It was a strange, very strange event. And the unexpected events and mysterious circumstances. While on the one hand, a monstrous dragon-headed machine tore the large chunks of the concrete canopy, in the dust of the demolition, there appeared smoke and a strong smell of fire spread all around. The plant growth and remains of the rubbish thrown to the bottom of the collapsed basin caught fire. And if the souls, if the souls and spirits of this area next to the old Tiber, the river in Rome, awoken from their centuries of sleep, had begun protesting. However, it wasn't the gods of the place, but Werner, who was protesting. A German dropout who had been living in the abandoned offices and who the fire brigade had searched for in vain, convinced that he had been killed in the flames. But Werner was luckily still alive and kicking and continued to live in this basin, refuge during the first phase of the work. Don't forget people working in the place for you. It's very important. Out of any rhetoric, just to remember how things, buildings like those are also done with the hands, the use of your muscles. Conclusions. From the stories that I have recounted, you can draw out your own evaluations and points of particular interest. I have no doubt on this. Each experience describes an attempt to solve a problem, following a consistent line and method within the given conditions, which I strongly fought to maintain both with the project and during the construction. The boat basin and the Flaminia atrium are projects that I could have developed anyway, as I was a professor at the two universities. But this occurred quite by chance and coincidence. No one chose me. Cecilia Metella, the little tiny small project, is a consequence of the atrium. Palazzo Massimo occurred due to the client's satisfaction with the work done on Cecilia Metella. None of these projects resulted from a competition, but from a direct assigning of the project. All were public clients. I consider myself honored in this. The boat basin, time-wise, is a paradox. The work began in 1998, and if all goes well, the second phase, costing 33 million euro, should begin in next year, 17, and finishing 19. Mimicking passages and the fortune to go ahead, it could be used as a basis for a type of snakes and ladders game. Gioco dell'oca, we call it in Italian. You choose the name. With a length of 320 meters, the boat basin is one of the most important among the most important Roman construction for size. Instead, Cecilia Metella consists on a volume in profile of a little more than 2 meters by a little less than 6. But the firms and different projects versions have requested more than a year worth of work, almost the same required for the boat basin. Here, the rules and criteria adopted for its initial use for the Faculty of Economics have shown to be withstanding the required changes and to be adaptable to the new function of the Faculty of Engineering. The flexibility in time and space has undoubtedly been an added value which its users have slowly become aware of as they use the building. The canopy that covers the basin has been dismantled, the old one, but the project has indeed shown to be resilient. Just few words more. Long construction times certainly result in negative effects on the project design because as things settle down, a myriad of alternative solutions appear with language reconsideration, technological revisions, and organization upheavals. Myriad, because the project has its legs and goes on as it was designed before. And if the boat basin, one again filled with water, had been planned as a swimming pool for the morning and maybe a rowing lap pool for the afternoon. So, as a conclusion, there is always, I must say, lurking in your head another project. And these were my stories. Thank you.